We are back on the ultimate American truck build, where we are completely restoring the single cab first gen Cummins truck for Joker, a drone pilot in the Air Force. If you remember, we have three main goals for this build: power, comfort, and reliability. In the last video, we took the chassis down to Alamo, Nevada with Charlie Pitcher and installed a new front suspension. In this video, you can see the chassis looks pristine, but that's not how we left off in the last video. So let me show you how we got here. In order to get the frame looking brand new, we first needed to remove all the suspension components that we just finished installing. We got it all disassembled. Couldn't have done it without my son there on a few things. Before we get all these parts off to sandblasting and powder coat, I want to do some things to the axles that involve grinding and sanding and welding. So I want to do that before we get them sandblasted and painted. So let's get that taken care of first, and then we'll take it to powder coating. We've got to put new spring perches on it because we cut the old ones off. And then we've got some shock towers. All these products I got from Rough Stuff Specialties. So we may have to massage some of this. They usually sell them kind of universally for the 14 bolt, the Dana 70, the Dana 80. So you have to kind of grind them and make them fit well. So let's see what we can do with these. We'll have to weld this other shock tab on, but these should turn out really nice once we get them all put together and welded onto the axle. First, we need to cut off the old spring perches and shock mounts. All right, we have our spring perch here. Got that all ground down. It fits the axle perfectly. We've got our shock mount right here. Got that welded together. Turned out really nice. One thing I wanted to show you guys, when you guys are welding thick stuff like this, you know, thick metal to thick metal, you should bevel the edge on the metal right here where you're going to weld, so that it's not a flat plane against a flat plane of the axle. There's this bevel for the weld to kind of go in there and really penetrate and connect the metal together. All right, we got her done. It is freezing cold out here, and I am in my official work boots and my toes are freezing, but let me show you this. Here they are, the spring perches and the shock mounts. So that turned out awesome. This Dana 80 is going to look good. Okay, we have everything all loaded up to drop off at sandblasting and powder coat. Most everything is going to get sandblasted and powder coated. The hubs I'm just going to get blasted, and the axles I'm just going to get blasted, because I have actually decided I don't want to get these powder coated because the axles are in such good shape. There's some of the seals that I don't even want to mess with. So frame will get blasted and powder coated, and we're going to use a different product on the axles and the hubs that will match the powder coat. So let's hook up the trailer, head to West Valley, Utah to extreme powder coating. So I brought the frame and the axles and some of the suspension components here to extreme powder coating because Robbie Layton, who I'm good friends with, recommended them. He says they do phenomenal work in a timely manner. So I'm really looking forward to this being done and having the frame back so we can reassemble everything. But then we'll be back in a couple weeks to pick it up. 1 week later, I got a call that all our parts were done at Powder Extreme Coating. Let's get back to the garage and get those axles all tidied up. So my plan was just to have these sandblasted, ready to paint when they're done. I have some reservations about that plan now. Having been sandblasted, there are a few holes in the axle tube, and I don't know how careful they were not to get sand in there. I assume they probably tried not to, but who knows. So I'm actually going to pull the spindles off, pull the axle shafts out, both sides, pull the cover off, and just clean everything out, make sure there's no sand in there, because that will ruin the axle very quickly. Well, that was the right choice. Let me show you. Here's the spindle. You can see how much sand is in there. Here's one of the axle shafts, and it is coated in sand. So that was a good choice. I'm gonna pull the cover off, clean this out completely, and then we'll reassemble it and be ready for paint. I should also add, this is not Powder Extreme Coating's fault. Cody from Powder Extreme Coating actually called me before he blasted the axles, kind of went over with me the risks and that it could potentially get sand in there. I told him just go ahead, and if it happens, I'll pull it apart, which is what we're doing now. So they were very diligent on their end, and I really appreciate that. All right, so I pulled the axle shafts out. Now on a rear axle, the seals are way out on the outside. On a front, the seals are right here as it comes into the pumpkin. So all this part of the axle tube is not lubricated, but I got it all cleaned out. I opened this up just to see did any sand get in here. It didn't appear that any got in there, but I pulled the carrier out, I pulled the pinion out, I cleaned everything, made sure it was good to go, and I think we're good to go. So I'm gonna get this all thrown back together. On these axles, they have this soft rubber line that goes to the caliper, and then there's usually a mount here for it to stick to before it changes to the hard line. Just like this. We're gonna get a new one that's nice and clean, but we don't have the hole for this to mount to. So I got with Rough Stuff Specialties, and they make these brackets that weld right onto the axle. So we're gonna come in here, weld these on, and that will give us the attachment point to transition from our rubber line to our hard line. Also from Rough Stuff Specialties, I ordered these, and I'll get these welded on and show you better exactly what they are, but these are to tie down the hard lines. So let's get these welded on, and then I'll show you what it'll look like and how it's going to tie down some of the lines. Okay, so now we have this bracket welded on here, so we can have our soft line come over, hook right into here. Then we'll come with our brake line, come up, bend it over right here. And here's that little tab I was showing you. So it's got a little Allen screw, it's a plate. Put the line in there, then screw in the screw, and it'll clamp that line down to hold it securely. All right, we've got the axles torn apart, cleaned, seals replaced, done a bunch of stuff on the axles, but as you can see, we have a huge mess here. So I'm gonna clean all this up, get the axles where I need them to paint them, and then we're gonna paint the axles. I'll show you what we're gonna use. I'm really excited to use this product. All right, after a lot of organizing, I made some space here. I put up this little paint booth I got on Amazon. I figured it would potentially help keep some of the overspray down. So I've got both axles set up here on jack stands. We're gonna see how this goes. So the first thing we're gonna do is use some of the Eastwood pre-paint prep. Got a couple cans of this. It's basically to degrease the metal. So we'll run this over it. And then we've got some epoxy primer with some primer catalyst. I got this off of eBay. Eastwood does sell a specific primer for the product I'm about to show you, but I didn't know about that. So I had already ordered this, so this is what we're gonna use. And then our top coat is gonna be this Eastwood Chassis Black Satin Underbody Coating. Got a whole gallon of this. So again, they do sell a primer specifically for this, but we're gonna use my epoxy primer since I have it. So let me get my respirator, get my paint gun all set up, and let's see what we can do with this. Painting in the garage in the middle of the winter. All right, our primer is set and ready to go. Now onto this Eastwood Chassis Black. I'm excited to use this. The nice thing about it is it comes already in the consistency to spray it out of the gun. You don't need to add any thinner or any catalyst or any hardener. You just put it in and spray it. For those of you wondering about ventilation, I got a nice blower fan from Costco and set it up with the garage door slightly cracked. It did a great job of evacuating all the fumes. Everything is all painted with our Eastwood Chassis Black. It's been curing for a few days. It's time to reassemble the axles, get the axles put under the frame, make this thing a rolling chassis. We've got our parking brake assemblies ready to go back on, but in order to do that, I want to flip the axle up. Right now we've got the pumpkin faced up this way with the differential cover right here. I figure this is the perfect time to install our new Yukon Gear differential cover. So I've got one for the rear axle and for the front. We're going to be using a couple Yukon Gear parts. This is one of them. Whew, this is beefy. So let's get it installed. Now, when I was choosing differential covers, I looked at every cover on the market and I wanted something in particular. I wanted it to look really good, but very simple. I also wanted a drain plug on the bottom of the cover so you don't have to pull the cover just to drain it out. And I wanted it to be super beefy. And if you look at this, it's almost a 1/2 inch thick. So it is beefy. So that's why I chose these Yukon Gear differential covers for the back axle and the front axle. Pro tip, when you need to get old gasket material off of a mating surface, a Scotch-Brite disc on a die grinder does an amazing job. I'll leave a link to some in the description if you need some. So there's that Yukon differential cover on there. Again, this thing is beefy. Got our drain plug here so we don't have to pull the cover just to drain the oil out and do some maintenance on it. This thing turned out awesome. So let's start getting the parking brake assemblies on there with the rotors, with the calipers, the hubs, get everything reassembled on this rear axle, and then we'll jump to the front axle. In an effort to maintain a standard of quality, I replaced every bearing, race, and seal on these axles. So for the lock nut on all the hubs on both axles, I'm using this Stage 8 lock nut. This thing is really cool. Kind of a fail-proof system for these hub lock nuts. What you do, we've got our outer bearing in there, put a thrust washer in it, then you get this keyed washer, line it up with the keyway, then you have this nut So we're going to put that on. We're going to torque it down to 120 to 140 foot-pounds. I do that a couple times, so I torque it down, back it off, torque it down, back it off. Then I torque it down and back it off 90 degrees. And that gets the bearing preload set. And I wish I had a couple hands because you also want to turn the hub while you're torquing the bearing down, or while you're torquing the hub down. Okay, we've got that torqued down. Now we take this, I don't know what to call it, kind of a splined thing. So it's got splines to match up with the nut, and then it's got these tangs to match up with that lock washer. It's actually got 8 different positions that it could go in. Oh, boom, first try. So if it doesn't line up right away, you can turn it, but that was perfect. And the last thing, it's got this huge snap ring. The washer is grooved for the snap ring right there. That's all there is to it. So that should, I mean, there's no way that's coming off. Ain't no way. All right, so our hub is on, our e-brake is on, our axle is in. I haven't completely tightened these down. What I did is I put a bunch of anti-seize all around the hub where the rotor is going to contact it metal to metal, and that's to keep it from seizing together. So we are ready to put our rotor on. There we go. That looks so good. So we got the rotors on. Here are the calipers we're going to use. So these came, they are bare metal. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a coat of paint on these. All right, the rear axle is done. This turned out so nice. So this is a Dana 80 with factory disc brakes from a 2002 Dodge, limited slip differential. Remember, we have our Yukon gear differential cover. We have our Rough Stuff Specialties U-bolt delete kit, brake line tabs, and our shear shock mounts. We have all brand new brakes, pretty much everything there I sourced from Rock Auto. And then we've got it painted with our Eastwood chassis black paint. So this turned out awesome. I'm gonna throw some roller wheels on this. So we move it out of the way and onto the front. I am excited to show you guys the brakes on the front. All right, we got our knuckle on, we got our axle in, kingpins in. We're ready to put our spindle on, but this is the point where I need to show you what we're doing as far as the brake setup. So I've got the spindle all ready to go. Anti-seize on the outside, grease on the inside. But here's the caliper bracket we're using. This is from Torque Motorsports. So we're gonna be running 14-inch 3rd, 4th gen calipers, 09 plus calipers, and rotors. So this is the bracket they sell to do that. Now you'll see there's a little slot right here. So this has to fit the spindle right here, and then it's got to clock just right, just like that. And it will only go on a certain way onto these bolts. These are not all symmetrical. So the calipers should face toward the rear. This should be right where it needs to be. Give it a little tappy. Just like that. So now we just need to put our dust shield on and our hub, all that stuff, so we'll get into that. But this is the bracket from Torque Motorsports to run these huge calipers and rotors. All right, we got all that on, looking really good. We got to find a hard bar, get all this tightened down, and then we're ready to start moving to the hub. So I'm having an issue getting the lug studs to go in. I was trying with the press, wouldn't work. Tried it with the socket and a lug nut, tried to suck it in. It was just stripping the splines or the threads off the lug stud. So these are upgraded lug studs. They're 9/16 lug studs. They're a little bit longer, And you probably can't see, but there's this thicker knurl part right here that would go through the rotor just fine, but it's not going through the hub. So what I'm doing is I'm taking these over to my belt sander and just barely sanding that down, leaving these splines on here so we get the splines to engage with the hub so it's not going to rotate when we put the lug nuts on. And I've done that and they've gone in fine. It's still a little bit of work, got to hammer them in, but that's how I want it to be. I want them to go in, but I don't want them to go in too easily. So we're just doing that. Again, if you're going to run this big brake conversion with these upgraded lug studs, you might run into this problem. All right, we got our hub all packed with grease. We got our bearings in there packed with grease. We're ready to throw our hub on. Got the giant rotor ready to put on, but there is something special I had to do to this hub in order to fit these rotors. So let me get the hub thrown on here. I'll show you how the rotors fit, and then I'll tell you about what I had to do to make these fit. All right, well, I got the nut torque down, the hub's all on, and I actually went to test fit the rotor, and I found out I made a mistake. This bracket is on backwards. It's mounted in the right spot, but it should actually be angled back here, so I've got it flipped around. So I'm gonna tear this down real quick, put it back together, catch up with you when I get that done. All right, I got that fixed. We have the caliper bracket in the right spot now. Hub's back on, so let me show you how massive these rotors are. We'll just temporarily put them on, throw the calipers on, show you how massive those are, but this is a sweet, sweet setup. 14-inch 2010 Dodge rotors. Stock on the first gen is, I don't even think it's quite 12 inches. I think it's 11.8 or 7. But even if it's 12, this is a lot more. You know, we have an inch extra on each side of this rotor for stopping power. The rotor for the caliper to grab on to brake it. So the diameter right here of the inside of the rotor is too small for the factory first gen hub. So Torque Motorsports, the company that makes this bracket, has the instructions on their website, but you have to throw this on a lathe and cut it down just a little bit. So this rotor is usually almost half an inch thicker on each side. So we had to cut almost an inch off of it. Jason from Reaper Restorations, a guy I met here locally, great channel, really good guy. He actually helped me and he threw these on his lathe, got them all turned down. Go and check out his video on that. He explains everything, what he's doing. You can see the whole process and he explains the measurements as well. All right, so these are, again, 2010 1-ton calipers, which is kind of nice. You just go to your parts store, tell them you've got a 2010 1-ton and you get everything. Calipers, brake pads, rotors, these caliper bolts even. All right, there we have it. These things are awesome. They're massive. You'll notice I haven't painted them red yet, which I'm going to do. But here's the deal. With this big brake upgrade kit, we can't fit 16-inch wheels over this. So the wheels I want, 17-inch wheels, they're on back order, so I don't have them yet. So we're actually going to take the calipers off. We'll leave the rotors on and we'll mount the wheels up so we can get everything mounted to the frame. So we can take the frame and everything down to Holden Bros Diesel in Bernie, Texas, install the motor. Before we put our wheels and tires on this axle so we can roll it around, I forgot we need to put our Yukon Gear diff cover on the front, fill it with fluid, and then put our Rough Stuff Specialties tie rod on. So we need to install the tie rod now, which connects both the knuckles on each side of the axle together so that when you steer, both wheels steer. Now I do have the stock tie rod, it's still in good shape, but I decided to go with a Rough Stuff Specialties upgraded tie rod. This thing is thick. So they send you the pipe, they send you both ends, so we just need to weld it in, paint it up, and then it's got the tie rod ends as well. So let's get that taken care of and then we'll throw this on again to connect those two knuckles together. All right, let's get our wheels and tires. I got to shuffle a bunch of stuff around in here, but we're going to start mounting the axles to the frame, which means we're going to put all the suspension components on as well. All right, we got our rear springs in. These are actually custom built 63-inch springs that I got from Atlas Suspension. So we got this installed. If you need leaf springs, Atlas Suspension out of California did a phenomenal job. So now we got to get our U-bolt delete plates on here from Rough Stuff, bolt those down, and then the rear is going to be all finished up. Now that we have the rear all done, all installed, let's head to the front, install the 3-link suspension now that most of it's powder coated, some of it's painted, but let's get it installed. This thing is coming together quick.
If you look carefully, I actually put these link arms on backwards. The aluminum heim joint should go down at the axle. I fixed this off camera after everything was installed.
So the springs that I bought for this truck came with these blue coils. Now it's not just a color, it's not that it's just pretty, but the different colors have different spring rates. So the blue ones would work well for a larger truck like an extended cab or a crew cab. But for the single cab, they might be a little too stiff. So Charlie sent me these other ones that are just slightly lighter duty, and these are super easy to change out. So this is a better spring rate setup for a single cab truck. Now you'll notice I'm spraying some stuff on all the bolts and anytime I'm sliding pieces together where it's powder coated. This is a tip I picked up from Charlie. He warned me when you're putting hardware in powder coated stuff or putting stuff together that might kind of shear together to use some white lithium grease. Here's the stuff I'm using, and it seemed to actually work really well. There are spots where I had to get some of the heim joints up in there, and I just sprayed some white lithium grease in there, shoved it up in, and it didn't damage the powder coat at all. Now I'm sure some of you guys are wondering, what are my thoughts on powder coat versus the Eastwood chassis paint that we used and other products? I am glad I did what I did. I powder coated most everything, but not everything. I'm really glad I used the Eastwood products where I did, and here's the reason why. Powder coat is super nice when you have it all done, but it can be very stressful when you're trying to assemble parts that are powder coated. If you chip or scratch anything, you can't fix it. It just flakes off. It will lead to a process of more of it flaking off over the years, so you have to be really, really careful. Now with the Eastwood stuff that I used on the axles and some of the suspension components, that is really nice. It's not quite as durable as powder coat, but anytime I nicked it or scratched it or something hit it, I could just grab the can of the chassis paint, spray a little bit where it needed it. It would dry so you couldn't even tell it was there. So that is one advantage of using this type of product over powder coat. But I'm glad I used both where I did. All right, we got our cross member in, we got our shocks in. We obviously have our tracking bars, I don't know what they're called. So we gotta get our steering box in, our steering brace, and then our sway bar, and that is all for the 3-link. So the shocks were actually a pain in the butt to get in here, but I did it. I had to be creative, use a jack, lift the frame up, do a bunch of stuff, but I got them in. That's what matters. Well guys, at the beginning of the video, I told you I'd show you how we got to this point with the chassis complete. There you have it. That was a ton of work and probably why it took me so long to get this video together. However, since then, we've already made a ton more progress on this. As a teaser, my camera is not on my tripod. It's actually sitting on top of the brand new 12-valve engine from Holden Bros Diesel, and just below it you can see the G56 Super Stick transmission. So stay tuned, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of this project or any of my other projects. Next video, we're gonna be taking a road trip in the OG crew cab down to Boerne, Texas to Holden Bros Diesel. So until then, we'll see y'all in the next video.